So my name's Edwin Buckley, and this session is called Pivot, Making the Most of Your TV Skills. And so a little bit about me. So I was a freelance TV producer for years. I've done my own pivots. I first went into recruitment and talent management, then I popped back into production, and then I ended up making my big pivot into PR and communications, first in-house, and now I run my own PR agency. And I also then became a career change coach, so also run a company called Another Path, which is a career change consultancy. We've also got three fantastic panellists who have also either made a pivot into a new industry or expanded their portfolio of what they work across alongside TV. So different ways to kind of approach that pivot. I think one thing that's, I'm just sort of chatting as well previously, is our TV skills and experience has been absolutely essential, whether we've made a change or whether we have, expanded, the areas we work across. So this is going to be a really practical session where we're going to dive into, what you could do starting even next week to start exploring what are those other opportunities to, look for additional, income streams, areas to work across, or even start thinking about potentially a transition if that's something that you're interested in doing. So we'll introduce the panel first off. So do you just want to say a little bit about what you do now and also your background and when you were working in TV or alongside what you do now?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name's Lucy Flowers. I worked my way up through telly from researcher through to edit producer. About 9-10 months ago I made the switch. I now work for SP Energy Networks as a wellbeing and communications lead. It's very different. It's a full-time job. I get paid every month. And I use my TV skills all the time. I make podcasts, I shoot videos and produce videos, and so it's been a huge change, but I'm currently loving it.
Paid monthly, you say? Interesting. Hi everybody, my name is Paddy Duffy. If you were in the previous session there where Martin was saying about somebody said to him once that because he worked in Glasgow and he'd worked in so many things, he said, your CV is mental. I get that at least 3 times a week, even now. I've got 3 different IMDb pages because whoever is putting them together thinks can't be the same guy. So my first job in television was on Top Gear. Everybody asks this question, so I'll head it off the pass. I'm not that Irish guy. But I moved in then went into quiz writing. Because that has been something I've been doing competitively since I was 8 years of age. So went on to do that for a while, then moved to London. Couldn't get arrested working in quizzes. So then I, naturally enough, moved into documentary. My first job in documentary was working for the legendary producer Norma Percy, and I was on that track for about 6 years. Then I moved up here and worked in development after that. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag. I don't know if it's indicative of a versatility or chronic indecision. You can decide at the end of this session. But in terms of what I'm doing now, I've been freelance now for about a year. And in that time, I've been doing a lot of radio stuff, some quiz work as well. But I suppose as we'll get into, a lot of the nature of what we do is very complementary, and transferable skills is kind of the name of the game. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've also got a QR code up on that slide there. So we're going to have about 10 minutes at the end as well for questions. So if you've got any questions for any of the panel as we go along, then pop them in on the QR code and we'll get to those at the end. So first things first, I think the idea, whether we call it career pivot, career transition, career change, it's quite intimidating, those first steps. What was that first stage of expanding to look at something else? What did you initially, start doing when you thought, I want to explore doing something a little bit different? And what about you, Lucy? What was your first steps in moving to what you are doing now?
I first started thinking about leaving telly just after COVID, so it was quite a long thought time, and I kind of hummed and hawed, and I loved telly. I left a career that I loved, so it's not. But it got to a stage where just the gaps were too big for me, and I just didn't want. I just mentally it wasn't for me anymore, and so I had to start thinking elsewhere. And I chat to friends. I know that sounds really basic, but I chatted to my friends who were not in TV, and I had conversations about different jobs. I did a coding course. I was thinking about doing that for a long time, and so I learned how to do Python, and there's free courses out there that you can do. So that was kind of one of my focuses. And then I started thinking about what skills I have in telly that would get me into a more corporate job, because the appeal of having a non-freelance life was quite high. My husband works in a corporate, and I thought, well, those benefits seem lovely. And one of my best friends works in HR in a big corporate as well, and she was talking to me about comms, and she was like, you know what, Lucy, I realised, because you don't like social media or anything, what about internal comms? Then you wouldn't have to deal with social media, because I don't post, I don't do anything. Everyone is surprised that I have Instagram, but I've never posted in my life. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then she put me in touch with a couple of her friends who work in internal comms. So the internal comms manager in her company, and then one of her friends who does. And I chatted to them about the skills and was like, oh, wow, like those skills are so transferable. They're so it kind of is what's needed. And one of them said something that really kind of rammed home for me, is that I'm so valuable. He was like, companies and their comms people spend so much money on external video companies. And by the way, ours does, and it is nuts, the amount that they pay. And so lots of comms departments are looking for people who have video skills. And it's not just video skills, it's producing skills. But then also you start thinking about all the soft skills, like all the research skills and producing skills. One of the guys that I spoke to was like, I spend my life talking to other people in other parts of the company, trying to find those stories to put in newsletters. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's exactly what I could do. So it was a bit of an odd one, because I went through loads of things. Oh, I forgot. I was also a taxi driver for a time on one of my breaks. And I also parked cars in a car garage as well. So in the winter breaks when they were longer. Discovered those weren't for me. But yeah, it was a long road till I finally get into that place going, oh, okay, I could do that. And then starting to look for those roles. But I was also looking for other things at the same time. I looked at recruitment and sales as well, because they as a TV producer and an assistant producer, you're selling something to someone. You're selling the idea of being on telly to someone when they don't necessarily want to, and you have to convince them. And I was like, well, sales. And I'm just really glad I didn't get a sales job.
I think there's something there actually about the soft skills. I think quite often when we're looking what else can I do, we might just think of that top title, producer, production manager, coordinator. But actually, I've seen a lot of success in people that have kind of pivoted away when they start really looking at what have they actually done within each show. What are those little extra elements that they might not initially think of that actually could be a whole new career. So, somebody that I know worked on a lot of crime documentaries, and they ended up moving to be a caseworker at a criminal justice charity because, sort of they could deal with quite vulnerable people, sensitive situations. I think, when I sort of went into my second sort of comms role, which at Prostate Cancer UK, that role, they were looking for someone that could also deal with all the celebrity ambassadors. And so actually, it was the 3 months of celebrity booking that I'd done in telly, that was it, that basically got me in and relevant for that role. So actually break down within each role. Is it a genre if you work on a lot of property shows? Actually, is there somewhere in the property industry that there could be something that's the in, rather than just how do I move from producer to X? No, how do I move from, these little things I actually have found is where I really thrive. So Paddy, how sort of you found that when you've been looking for what are those ins, how do I sort of translate things across?
Yeah, in terms of sort of where the impetus has been for me to sort of change or to evolve or whatever, catastrophe has normally been one of the main things that sort of caused it. I started in radio. I suppose TV was my first pivot in the first place, actually, because I had been coming out of university. I had been doing a lot of radio for RTE, and I'd also been working a lot in youth work. I was in the public sector, and then when Ireland's economy exploded, there was nothing to do. There was no public sector to speak of. So then that was at the point that I thought, well, then maybe it's time to go for broke and give TV a go. So I think certainly having your back to the wall does then make you, it certainly sharpens your sense of, well, what do I do next? So in terms of the ends, I think a lot of it is just being able to, identify, well, what is it that I've been wanting to do. Like, you know, if you have that sort of that classic TV scenario where you're given a card that says money and a card that says time, and then you have to choose one or the other. Now that you have maybe the time, or sort of what is it that you would like to ruminate on? And, you know, what I found is that whenever I moved into documentary, a lot of things sort of clicked into gear that I'd always sort of wondered. Like, I spent an awful lot of the time sort of in the early Obama administration sort of getting quite up to date with everything that was happening there. That was sort of been quite across all that, and sort of, and sometimes I'd be writing articles, or sometimes it'd be just kind of you know, punditry or something like that. But ultimately I'd be thinking, what is all this for? Like, I'm doing this, and I said, I don't know what my end kind of goal is. But it came fairly into focus then when, having worked on University Challenge in Manchester, and then moving to London and resolving to move to London, I go, what do I do now? And so I was looking at all these sort of game shows and quizzes and everything, and I couldn't get traction anywhere. But I looked on Talent Manager, and I saw that there was a documentary assistant producer going, and it was about North American politics. And I go, actually, you know what? I think in a weird way I've been training for this for a long time. And so then when I went into the interview, it was one of the best interviews of, you know, it was a really, really enjoyable experience. So I think spending I hope this doesn't sound very utilitarian, but spending your downtime doing something that you enjoy can then also be very valuable for what you do. And you're like making your hobbies your job, and vice versa. It does come with you know, I suppose you do have to be very, you do have to take care with that, so that you don't end up, you know, sort of constantly working. But there's certainly, I think, a lot to be said for that, is that sort of filling your time not working in television, doing things that you really enjoy. And yeah, and then, you know, once the catastrophe comes, I said, well, how do I apply this, and how can I maybe, like, I'd be doing it anyway, so then how can I, you know, how can I make this valuable to people? How can I, you know, keep the lights on doing it? And so yes, it requires, I think, a lot of self-reflection, but it also requires you, I think, to carve out a bit of time to actually do those things, which is very difficult for freelancers to do, I think, because we often don't have an awful lot of time. And I think TV sometimes does grab you into, at the very start, say, of a project or of anything, it's like, oh, well, we could do anything. This could be, you know, this could go anywhere. Isn't this fantastic? And then with no intervening period whatsoever, it's like, right, okay, we've got to make decisions, and we've got to start cutting. Yeah. So trying to sort of have a bit of that time in the middle, I think, is absolutely vital.
And I think that gets us, in a way, to think about how we position our experience, or reposition our experience, or I always call it personal rebranding as well. So how we can take those TV skills, those TV experiences, but also those other elements. So, you know, like you said, it is difficult when people, we all know what, sort of how sort of intense and busy productions can be. But are there those spaces where you could set up a little side hustle, or you could do some personal projects, or, someone I know, they volunteered, they had a bit of sort of downtime outside of work, they volunteered and did a podcast for a charity, and because of that, he could then say, I produced a podcast, and now he's just gone and got an in-house job, a staff job as a podcast producer on telly. So I think absolutely, I think there's something interesting there about, it's not just the telly experience, I know that's what we're predominantly talking about, but what else can you build into your sort of portfolio of skills as well? So talking about that, and quite sort of interesting, sort of loose, when we were sort of saying before about that moving to the comms and well-being, and how that felt quite natural for you from the types of shows you'd been working on. What were those real practical steps in repositioning your skills and experience for that new job market and that new industry?
I used AI, like everybody does. So I used AI to rewrite my CV, I think that is a really good thing to do, because I didn't know how other people's CVs were supposed to be. So I chucked it into AI, and I said, could you rewrite this for internal comms? Could you rewrite this for sales? And And then I did that. And then obviously you don't just trust AI. Like, don't just let that go. Reread and rethink and make sure it sounds like you. But I also, the first few times I think I tried to look at my CV, I didn't really know how to do it. And I realized that, and when you're applying for a job, it's like, it asks you to put in all your jobs. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be exhausting, because you've done 5 jobs a year or whatever it is. And also they're going to think you're a complete flake because the rest of the world doesn't work like TV does. And so I instead of putting it per job, I put it per role. So I said I had, 4 years as an assistant producer and, 2 years as an edit producer and things like that. So that's how I did it. And then I kind of put in those roles and worked for X company and X company and X company, and put the skill set so it looked a bit more like my CV did when I was 21, when I wasn't in TV. And then when I got to applying for my current role, my actual job, one of the things that it said in the job advert was, and you've got to tailor it for job advert, and I know it can be exhausting, and it is exhausting, and you hear so many horrible stories of people doing 200 applications and not getting an interview, and that's crushing. I looked at it and it said must have produced a wellbeing program, which obviously they don't actually ever need you to have produced a wellbeing program. No one I currently work with in my team has ever produced a wellbeing program. But I kind of went, well, I kind of did produce wellbeing programs in TV. And so I made sure that I put that in. It wasn't in my original CV. And because sometimes they sift CVs with AI and computer. And so to get through that sift, where it wouldn't be a human reading it, I was like, well, I did produce wellbeing programs actually, yeah. And I put that in and I got through sift. And then as soon as I was in front of them, they were like, wow, like you've got, and as soon as they read, because CVs are interesting. And I frankly think they kind of almost interviewed me because they were curious. And then I turned up and was wonderful, obviously. But it's kind of looking at what they're looking for and going, right, well, where in my TV career, and we were talking about it in terms of like, I did produce wellbeing programs. I did a whole thing about digital detox and things like that. And what are those like little things that you've got that you can draw? And it's not just I produced shows and I did research, but it's like specific research.
Yeah. And I think absolutely, there's also something there about language as well when you're doing that. I think absolutely tailor the CV per job, don't just send a blanket one. But also I think there's something really interesting with language, and this is always actually with clients, I think one of the top tips, and particularly people that I've worked with that are coming from TV and media, is our language in telly is quite niche language to use. Things like, even things that we, casting, TV series, that doesn't necessarily translate as obviously into other industries and can actually sometimes sound you're from a completely different world. And what they want is to feel like you've been doing similar things, which you have been in a different context. So actually study, use AI for research, absolutely, or study different CVs, different sort of job applications. But what language are they using and how can you adapt the language you're talking about so it fits there? So even little things. So rather than things like TV series, could you talk about, sort of media projects or, sort of content projects? I always sort of as well think the word productions is a bit jarring if you're looking at other industries. You can talk about projects or programs is really interesting. Like you said, they put programs. You have been doing wellbeing programs. That can mean everything and anything. And actually, once you look more and more into the language and what they mean, it starts... it fills you with some confidence because you've absolutely been doing this. The word that got me, it took me a good couple of years to work out what actually is this. Stakeholder. Looking for stakeholder. A stakeholder is a person you have dealt with. Like, we deal with stakeholders in TV every single day. We probably have an intense, period. The other key one, access. So if you're, getting access somewhere or casting, that's building partnerships. There's whole careers as kind of partnership managers as well. So really, what's that language? What have you been doing? Can you rewrite your CV with that sort of new language as well? So, but yeah, back really to rebranding, how you repositioned your skills. Paddy or Ellen, have you got any sort of tips when it comes to that?
Do you want to?
Feel free.
Well, in terms of rebranding, well, you see, I think the thing about it is that I think you have to consider yourself like as a freelancer, and like you said, Edwin, it's like you kind of have to think of yourself as a human being first, and a title second or possibly third. And I think that's sort of where it starts from. Like we all contain multitudes. Like sort of on a day, like even in terms of when we watch television. It's not like there are people that watch the news and only the news. It's that people watch the news followed by the soaps. Like we contain multitudes. So I think it's just being able to, starting with that really, and then sort of seeing sort of what's in front of you. And it's interesting. So I think there's two things sort of based on what you and Lucy were talking about. You can use sort of television to impress when you're outside, because like people want to talk about that sort of thing. And even within television, what I found is that people in documentary are impressed by the quiz show element, and people in the quizzes are impressed by the documentary element. But people outside of television do tend to be quite interested in hearing what you got to say. So you can definitely parlay that. So it's whether there may be issues around stakeholders, you can definitely parlay that kind of interest as well. But there's also things that you can bring to bear from the other side. I mean, I remember we had a funding application once, when I was in development at an old company, and because I used to work, say, effectively in the civil service, I'd worked in government departments, I kind of had a sense of sort of what sort of questions they were asking for, and so I sounded a bit like Sir Humphrey from Yes Minister, but that's sort of what I knew that's what they wanted to know, and they wanted this thing broken down in certain language. So I think, it's if you kind of break these things down in terms of sort of, and we're all human beings and not titles. And I think, it's just sort of looking at the issue that you have in front of you and saying, well, what exactly is it that people need in this particular moment? And once you sort of start from that, then sort of everything kind of follows from there, really. There's another sort of aspect of this that's important, is that it's very, I think it's really important to make sure really that you're dealing with people sort of where they are, and that sort of in terms of sort of that sort of sense of branding is that everybody is coming at these sort of things from a different angle, but we're very lucky, I think, in terms of sort of as freelancers, that we have now this is a double-edged sword, and I will get to sort of both points of that. But as freelancers, we are quite lucky that we're able to pursue some things. I mean, it's like, so, if you want to be a journalist, you can write things, you can blog about things. If you want to be sort of you want to make short films, you can get your phone out and do it in a way that, say, for example, an occupational therapist can't go around breaking legs to try and get experience. So there is that, and that is a great opportunity. In some ways. However, and I think this is a big thing that we need to, is that it's often it's easier said than done sometimes, because the time isn't available, the resources aren't available. I mean, we talked about it earlier on. People from a working class or from sort of different sort of communities do not get the opportunity to get these things up and out. Whether it's considered maybe frivolous because they don't have the time to do it, or whatever else, or whatever sort of cultural factors there are there. We need to be very aware of the fact that it costs money to be free, and we need to really, I think, make sure as freelancers that hopefully in the next couple of years we have something a bit like what we have in Ireland, sort of around like the artist scheme, or that what was suggested would happen. Sort of in some of the recent manifestos in the Scottish election, that people essentially can get something akin to a universal basic income or something like that, because it is very, like, you read autobiographies of people, creative people from the 1980s, and a lot of them will say the dole's what saved me. The dole's why I was able to pick up a guitar and become a big band and end up having and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, is that that was they put more into the exchequer now than if they didn't have that. So I think, it's sort of in terms of sort of when we talk about rebranding and sort of individual, we're only one person in that factor. And so then, but collectively, we need to make sure that we're not losing an awful lot of talent in the get-go, because I suppose we're the lucky ones. We've been able to pivot. We've been able to sort of do different things. But there'll be people that are starting in television now today at sort of at 21, 22, and the chances for that are atomised. The chances even of a hinterland are increasingly atomised. And so I think that's something that we really need to keep our eye on as well.
Absolutely, and actually interesting, because I think you're absolutely right there. Not everybody can as well do those other things, get it out there. But when you are in a telly job and in a contract, are there ways you could try and get that wider experience in that contract? Can you add on doing extra things? I remember I did that a couple of times when I was at a company called True North Productions working on this Channel 5 consumer show. And they went, oh, we want to get social media channels up and running. This was a few years ago. And so I said, oh, I can manage the social channels. So suddenly then that became part of my official role in my contract. So then I could then start saying, I'm social media manager. When I was at my final telly job before I left, was at BBC Children's in development. And so when I was doing treatments, no one asked for this, but I always just added on a section, what's that wider digital and social strategy to this TV show? And that allowed me to then be able to talk in interviews about how I've looked at content in various sort of forms as well. So I think actually, as well as outside work, in your role, are there other things you could, sort of do, take other responsibilities, create things to do on top of your day-to-day within jobs as well to make it doable? So we've got kind of about sort of 5 minutes left before we sort of go to questions from the audience. So really interested from everybody to get, this can be one tip or it can be a couple. What would your top, tips be for starting the exploration next week, let's say, if you want to look at exploring other areas, what's that good starting point? What would your top tips be to just, sort of beginning that sort of exploration stage of looking at either expanding your portfolio of what you do or looking for a kind of career pivot entirely?
I think these guys said it really well in that what do you actually care about is really important. For me, it was also lifestyle. I think it's really important to remember that you're choosing a lifestyle. I knew I was looking at big corporates because I wanted security and safety. And that wasn't just for my financial health and my life, but it was also my mental health. I suffered quite a lot in TV with my mental health, and for me, I knew I needed stability. Like I knew I didn't want to pivot into other media kind of areas. I wanted to do that. So I think I would think about lifestyle and think about what you're choosing in terms of your lifestyle and go, right, okay, will I get that in a startup? Will I get that in a really small company? Because, I talked to someone the other day about when they're working in a small company and how easy it is to do stuff. And it is not easy to do things in a big corporate in any way whatsoever. Everything takes months and it's exhausting, but I get healthcare. No, I don't actually, but there's other benefits, and so I think you've got to, as well as thinking about what you really care about, think about what's the lifestyle you want, what is it you do and don't like about your career in telly, and if you're wanting to get away from being freelance because you don't like your gaps, or if you're wanting to still be creative, like where could you do that? But think about what you want from your life, because it's your life. One of you said that life is short. It's your life. You need to live it the way you want to live it. And if being freelance isn't for you, so don't think about freelance careers. Think about, a permanent career. But again, think about this. I would say what you were saying, Edwin, earlier about those programs you did. What did you really love about those programs? Like, I did a digital detox program. I was really passionate about putting down your phone and things. And so that led me into the well-being side of things. And, I could have gone down the history route. I spoke to someone at a party about her history career, and I was kind of looking at that as well, because I loved the history programs that I do. And it's we've got all those nuggets in there because we're so versatile as TV people, and our careers have been many and varied, that you've got all those little nuggets, and have a think about them.
I would say only connect, and not the quiz show, I mean the quote. Only connect, the passion and the pros, and both will be exalted. I think it's a really important thing to do and to sort of to keep in mind, to keep the connections in mind between the things that you want to do in your life and the things that you are. I found, that writing, script links for radio was incredibly useful for writing for quizzes. I've found quizzes incredibly useful for pitching to channels. I've found all this and all the things, all the sum totals of the things that you are in life, you can find ways for them. So it's about keeping alive to those connections, I think, is the key thing. And in terms of sort of if you feel like you're making a big leap from one thing to the other, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You don't have to be brilliant straight off the bat. Don't be afraid to talk to people from other disciplines, and in the hope that you think that you might be saying the wrong thing. I think if you go in with the right frame of mind, that is tremendously important. And people are there to help, and people are very accommodating in this industry. I think everybody kind of knows, and there's this idea of like I think sort of these sort of big forbidding bosses, I think is maybe a thing of the past. So yeah, don't be afraid to only connect.
Absolutely, and I'll put in some of my top tips as well. So I think the best thing, and I do that, we do this in coaching a lot, but just start looking back at your CVs. You can even, some people like drawing it out, a bit of a career timeline, and think, throughout that career, at what points did you really thrive? At what points were you really fulfilled? When were you at your best? What were you doing at that point? What was it that, created great success on that, program you were working on, or that, you thought, we're getting a great reputation, within a certain area, and really try and pull those out and use that as that starting block. And then after that, it's all about learning the language. That was an absolute game changer for my own career move. And then when I'm sort of working with people now, that once you start learning the language of the other industries, and that could come from research, but as well reaching out to people. I've just had a client and I gave them a task to reach out to a couple of people in the new area they wanted to move into. They've come back, they've got 8 calls in a week with people, which was more than, they needed to get. But it's great. People will help you and have conversations. Look at people's LinkedIns as well is great. How did they make their career journey? I spent hours and hours, if not days or weeks or months, just, studying LinkedIn of people that had worked in telly and moved into other areas. So yeah, do that, sort of research. What interests you? Where do you thrive? What are the really niche areas within your TV career where you think, that's where I, could really sort of look at a transition or an expansion, and then think, right, and what is the language of that industry? How does it work? What's the hierarchy? What's the routes? Do I need to train? Do I need to not? So they're sort of my sort of top tips. So shall we get some questions? Have we got questions in?
Excellent. So this one is anonymous. I want to acknowledge the grief involved in leaving TV, which is a profession that we're all probably in because we love it with passion. What advice do you have for getting past that and finding joy in your profession?
Who wants to take that one? Yeah, Lucy?
Yeah, it took me a really long time. And I think there's also in the grief that you have worked so hard, and so hard over so many years to get to where you have, and you've built both your skills and your career, and yeah, it's really, really hard to let that go. I found that incredibly difficult, and as I said earlier, it took me 5 years basically to kind of get to the point where I could let go, and I actually left. That's also because I'm just a bit scatty, but I think for me, it was about seeing what I could have on the other side, and finally realizing what life could be like what positives there were on the other side. That I wasn't just letting go of a career that I'd built. We haven't let go. I still use my skills, and actually, one of the things that we didn't say was the people skills that we have are so important and so sought after in a world where AI is kind of on the brink of taking over all the menial stuff. Your people skills are so valuable, and I think it's about looking at it not so much as a grief, although I did go through that. And I had to, I finally let go, and it's about trying to be hopeful about the future. It's about turning that grief into something positive and going, okay, but actually what I can get on the other side is stability, is a whole new challenge, actually. You know, a whole new challenge to put your skills somewhere else and actually have to you kind of have that excitement of TV because you've suddenly got to make your way in a place that's totally alien to you, and that's kind of exciting in of itself.
Yes. What I might say as well, as somebody who is still at least sort of in television, or sort of sometimes feel a bit semi-detached maybe, and I think that's probably a fair thing to feel even if you're in a full-time job in television, to be honest. I think the thing though that keeps those sort of feelings at bay for me anyway, is the fact that the television that I got into is dead anyway. So is the radio that I got into, you know, when I was working on mini discs and before YouTube was even around. Television as we knew it is dead anyway. So and television is always sort of regenerating. So I think that kind of keeps me a bit. It's like, you know, you can't go home again. There's things that used to be in television that are not around anymore. There are a handful, I would say, maybe of people running maybe indies or something like that who made their money, and a lot of money in the 90s making, you know, when you could get a 12-part epic about the history of cheese off with no problems whatsoever. And now those days aren't around now. Some of these people are still around and they haven't really cottoned on to it yet, but you know, it's changing all the time. And so I think that helps me an awful lot in terms of like, yes, the television's dead. I mean, it'll be something else in 5 years. And like we've been saying, like we're all people with interests, and we'll find a way to make something. I said, if anybody's ever had the instinct to, you know, point a camera at something or point a microphone at something and go, that's not going anywhere. That's, you know, cinema hasn't gone because of television. Radio didn't go because of cinema. So, you know, we'll be fine in that regard. It is a wrench, but at the same time, it's, you know, times change and we have to change with the times. That's not to say that things in the television industry aren't a mess and need to be badly ameliorated. But in terms of the actual, you know, precise nature of the medium, it certainly keeps me going to know that television will change dramatically in a couple of years anyway. And I can't, you know, and I can't feel sad about it.
And I think as well, I haven't worked in TV now for sort of nearly 6 years. And I still fundamentally feel like a telly person. I've worked, you know, sort of within charities, I've worked in comms, PR, coaching, I've worked in all these different areas. I think because TV was my first career and for such a long time, it's fundamentally a part of me. You know, I'm from Yorkshire, I live in Manchester, and I'm a TV person. It's fundamentally still part of me, and those networks, loads of my closest friends are telly people. I still read televisual and broadcast. I'm still interested in it, and it's still part of me. I can have deep conversations about TV production, take an interest when friends are working on different productions and asking them about it. So it doesn't necessarily need to feel like you're not part of that community. I think fundamentally, you know, what we experience in TV is almost something loads of other people in other industries will never, you know, understand what we mean. So you're part of something, and I think that remains. And, you know, now I feel a lot more comfortable saying loudly and first that I used to work in telly. When I first made the transition, I felt I had to hide that a little bit because I was trying to reposition myself. Now, I'm really proud of it, and I can still talk about it and have conversations. And nobody cares about, you know, some great work I've done for a charity. They all want to know what it was like working on Big Brother. So it still, you know, sticks with you and stays with you. And it's something to be proud of. And also those skills in telly, we were saying this as well, which I haven't really sort of dived into too much, but you can still use them. You know, when I was head of comms at a modern slavery charity, I was going out and PDing the videos for the charity. So you can still think of ways to also get that sort of creative kick of those elements that you're sort of like in telly as well. So yeah, I think 3 seconds, we're on absolute time. Unless there was one final question, I think we're done. So yeah, thank you so much.